You got a quorum here?
What else?
I'm just,
Oops. Answers the question.
oh,
Miss, oh, Miss.
How you doing?
well,
Good to see you.
good to see you
Yes.
as well, Mark.
Oh,
Happy
wait,
July.
Yeah.
I know.
You don't hate me?
And Jay's gonna leave. Don't leave.
You late.
Accommodating us. Hi, Mark. Andrew, how is DC? Hi. Okay, you need to tell us about it.
Feedback.
Okay. Awesome, awesome.
Lee?
Yeah.
Tess, can you hear me okay? And can you go ahead, yeah, and hit the unmute on the iPad?
Can you hear us?
Yep. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, there's a little bit of feedback, Tess. I think make sure your laptop make sure your laptop is muted, but the iPad is not muted. Okay, yeah, Tess, go ahead and try turning your laptop volume all the way down and then unmuting the iPad.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, there's just an echo.
How about now?
Nope, there's still an echo, but I can hear you.
Check. Okay, no echo. Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm ready to call the meeting to order. Julia, are you ready? And then Tess. So you on the floor, I guess. Julia is working the virtual side of the meeting, and then you'll be.
She's doing it all. I'm just.
Oh, she's doing everything?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, Julia, do you want to keep your name as it is on screen, or do you want to change it? It says Kristen right now.
That's like Kristen. Let me go ahead and change that really quick.
Okay.
It was okay for, I think.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have a quorum, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9.
Well, and I did, by the time I found it.
6. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, NJ, and thank you all for joining at this more last minute notice commission meeting. And sorry for those of you that it caused an inconvenience for the last meeting, and just thank you for your flexibility. But yeah, I'll give it back to you, NJ, for us to get started if we want to do go through a roll call.
Okay, sounds good. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We're having a special Climate Action Commission meeting. I believe that we are the 8th today. Everything has been very busy, so I'm trying to keep track of time. It is 4:07. I'm calling this meeting to order. So we are meeting in person in Woodland. Remote access is available. Julia is with us remotely. We're going to follow. So because this is a special meeting, I need to lay just some of the ground rules for today. We're going to focus exclusively on the draft of the climate action and adaptation plan. So this is not going to be our regular meetings in terms of voting on item, no action items today. We don't need a quorum to meet. We do have one as far as I can see. And I think that's about it. Public comments are going to be the same in terms of the length. And I think we're ready to get started. So Julia, we're ready for the phone call, the roll
Great.
call. Oh my goodness.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Reed,
Here.
Commissioner Daddle,
Here.
Commissioner Allman,
Here.
Commissioner Kim,
Here.
Commissioner Serena. Okay, not here. Commissioner White. Okay, also not here. Chair Mavondo, and sorry, NJ, I should have had you up first. Sorry about that.
It's okay, here.
Commissioner Austin,
Here.
Commissioner Alvarez. Okay, also not here. And then Commissioner Bennett
Here.
and Commissioner Britton.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any ex officio?
Sarah Morgan is not here. And I do believe that Carla had said that she would attend. So I'll keep an eye out to see if she hops on, and I'll promote her to a panelist.
Thank you. And then just for, my own personal knowledge, do we have any representative from supervisors today online?
No, actually, yes, we do. Sorry, I see Sheila Allen.
Okay, welcome, Sheila. Thank you for joining us. Anything else, Julia, before we move on to the land acknowledgement?
No, yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the land acknowledgement.
Okay, thank you. So Commissioner Reed is going to read the land acknowledgement for us.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
We should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: Kachildehe Band of Winton Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzaldehe Band of Winton Indians, and Yotadehe Winton Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected, as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands.
Thank you, Commissioner Reed. So I'm inviting members of the public and everyone in attendance to refer to the document that you received, which has the supporting material for today. So we just read the land acknowledgement, and we're now moving on to the staff report, which is going to be a bit of a guiding document for today's discussion in discussing the draft of the CAP. So
Yeah.
quick question, Julia, and I should have known before starting the meeting. So I know this is a special meeting. Can you remind me if there is, or maybe, Deputy Allen can also let us know, public comments, do we still take public comments before the meeting, or do we just take them when we're discussing the draft? Because I think that today we're not discussing anything not on the special agenda, which is just the draft of the CAP.
Yeah, I don't see any public comment at this time,
Okay.
but I think I'm comfortable with us saving it for the bulk of the discussion for the CAP.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Thank you. So let's then get started on discussing the draft of the CAP. So Julia, I'm gonna, give you the floor. Please share with us more regarding the staff report. And I know that you also had some guidelines that you wanted us to keep in mind as we're diving in the discussion. And actually, if it is okay with you, because they are specific items you would like to hear about. So I will ask you to prompt us on, the different sections of the feedback. We have appendices, chapters, chapter 6. So you have the floor. We're listening and we'll be reacting, based on what you share with us. Thank you.
Great, thank you, NJ. And yeah, I'm just going to really briefly walk through, just chat about what was in the staff report that was shared. And so first off, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so wanted to just give a quick update on just, where we are now and how we got here. And as NJ mentioned, just what would be helpful in guiding the conversation. I'm going to skip through a lot of this since you guys are already really familiar with all of the incredible groups that are part of this effort for the commission or for the CAP. And so I also just wanted to update quickly on just our outreach to date. So after we closed out our tabling events for the spring and summer, and then our workshop series 3, we've now done a total of 34 tabling events, 20, and actually it will now be 23. We just did 3 presentations at Yohede last week on Monday. And so that will go up a little bit, and then we have completed our workshop series and just did our 6 workshops throughout the month of June. So wanted to give that little update here. But so for the main, the only item on the agenda today being the feedback for the draft CAP. I know I had sent this out and some of you have already sent your feedback back, which has been really helpful. The feedback that we've received is so great so far. So I'm really excited for the discussion that we're going to continue to have today. I have gotten the feedback from you all and others and city, county staff as well, that the reviewing the CAP is really overwhelming. It's massive. And to make that a little bit easier and try to keep bringing people back to higher level feedback, I have these 3 sectioned out areas of the CAP to kind of help keep it higher level. And the 3 of those would be the feedback on the appendices as a whole, the feedback on the chapters as a whole, and then the feedback of the strategies. So chapter 6, the strategies, measures, and actions. And I had included some guiding questions in the staff report that was sent out along with this. And we'll talk about those briefly and can continue to refer to them during the conversation. And I want to remind that just for a group as wonderful as all of you are that's been so engaged, I think keeping the feedback higher level is what we have tried to do to keep things respectful of your time, since you've all been so involved in providing feedback on so many elements of the CAP so far. But we also appreciate all of your feedback. So when looking at considering feedback for the appendices, the things that we want to guide the questions we want to guide the conversation with are the appendices comprehensive and relevant? Do they provide sufficient detail to support the main content of the CAP? And are there any additional elements that should be included? Similarly with the chapters, thinking about it in terms of organization, are they organized logically and coherently? Do they effectively address the key objectives outlined for each section? And is there any information that seems redundant or could be streamlined by maybe adding it to the appendices instead, and cutting from the chapter? And then with chapter 6, being one of the main chapters that I think people will be most interested when picking up the CAP, are the strategies outlined in chapter 6 aligned with the overall goals of the CAP? And do you think that there's any strategies, measures, or actions that appear to be missing from some of the rounds of feedback that we've done? And is the language clear and accessible, or do you think there's some areas that require simplification or further explanation, or even need to be called out a little bit more explicitly in the beginning of the CAP instead of being as in the weeds of it? So those are some guiding questions to kind of get us through for today and help keep feedback at that higher level. But again, this discussion is open to all feedback. So with that, I was going to go through the boards that we had the boards that we had at the workshops to kind of help facilitate that. And I think I would also be happy to keep anything up on the screen if people would like. These were the boards that we had shared at the workshops to guide people through, the measures being on the right and then the strategies being on the left. We'd combine them into different, like 4 boards of relevant sections. And we use this to kind of guide people's thoughts and questions about the measures and strategies. So we had done transportation and buildings, water and waste, natural and working lands. And then this was our resilient communities board. A lot of measures on here, as you guys know. So I'm happy to keep anything up that would be helpful. Wanted to just quickly remind you that the current plan is for the final CAP to go for adoption and then move into implementation in October. And then 2024 to 2027, we will start phase 1 of implementation. And then 2027 to 2030 will be phase 2. So that is, I wanted to keep it really brief and keep it open to move right along to the discussion. So I'll go ahead and stop there, and I'm happy to pull anything back up on the screen for people if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Julia. And before we dive into the feedback for the appendices, I want to remind us that this meeting is going to run until 6 p.m. and not 6:30 p.m. as usually, because it's a, again, special one, and we do want to be mindful of your time. And then Julia, also before we get started, and I'm inviting the commissioners to weigh in case you've heard from community members. My understanding is that we have received already lots of feedback that called out the equity aspect of the draft and expressing that for some people it wasn't clear enough how, you know, equity was centered in this process. And I believe that you had mentioned maybe that you wanted to address that as we started. Is there anything you want to share with us on that before we give you feedback?
Yeah, I would be happy to quickly walk through the feedback that we got. I won't, it was what was sent out today. For the sake of time, I won't go through all of it. But it's available for all of your reference over email. And then it will be posted as well with the meeting minutes for this meeting. And some of the biggest suggestions were not having, or I guess considerations were the feeling that the definition that we currently have for a just transition feels flawed or lacks an understanding of the just transition framework that was set forth in the resolution. And that I think the suggestion was that in the general plan, the language that surrounded environmental justice and that the current general plan would be a little bit more sufficient. The concern is that the American Rescue Plan funding is not being prioritized for BIPOC communities, essential workers, small business owners, and youth that are most impacted. And so from what I can also, I'm also happy to read through the full public comments, but it touched around considering a new definition for just transition and the concern that the current cap doesn't speak on that. There was in the same bucket of suggestions, including the gravel industry. So mining was not a part of the inventory. I can speak more to that too if people have questions. And that there needs to be a prioritization of hazard pay and financial relief for farm workers. There needs to be a requirement for environmentally and socially responsible purchasing. That the economic, social, and ecological just transition needs to be revised for sustainable development. That was in the cap, so that would be under one of our housing measures in the cap, and then our healthy communities, my bad. And then remove working lands, the working lands carbon credit scheme. There was concern around this as something that's included as an element in the cap. And then the suggestion to prioritize and restore wetland, county wetlands to incorporate the Yolo County 2021 Sustainability Plan in the 30-30 goals for the state of California, and significant other comments that to center traditional ecological knowledge, reestablish the Climate Action Commission then as an independent oversight body. And that sums up the gist of the comments that were received that were sent in for this meeting. Again, these were sent out over email, but I'll go ahead and stop there, and we can go ahead and move on unless anyone has questions about the public comment we received.
Okay, I don't see any reactions on our hand. So Commissioner Reed wants to address that, and then we'll move on to the appendixes.
I'd be interested, Julia, in your impression overall of the collective comments. I think what you just read off was from one individual. If you could give us a sense of sort of the issues that have popped out or popped up at the meetings that seem to have either raised the greatest support and interest, or the ones that have caused some consternation. So if you can just give us a high line on that, I think it would set a good framework for our own discussion here in the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Reed.
Yeah, I would be happy to. From the in-person workshops that we had that were in Esparto and Knights Landing, the biggest, I guess, call out for us to pay more attention to was the need for more cooling centers, more resiliency centers, the calling for one to be in Woodland, and to prioritize our farm worker populations in that respect. There were comments about how the Yolo County average farmer age is older than surrounding counties, and that with extreme heat, many farmers don't have access to cooling in their homes. And so they're working all day in the extreme heat, and then they're coming back to their homes where they never have a chance for their body temperature to cool down. So we received comments about just the need to prioritize our farm workers more in the cap and consider strongly as we move forward into implementation, how we're going to look at resiliency centers and just how exactly we're going to prioritize these essential workers during such extreme heat and as climate continues to change. The other feedback that we received that was more from the virtual workshops were calling out of specific areas in the cap, or I guess the readjustment of areas in the cap to be moved a little bit earlier, like in the appendices, and then to cut the chapters a little bit. And so a lot of those had to do with justice and how we're focusing on environmental justice and a just transition, such as calling out or potentially moving some key points that are in the chapters up into the appendices or into the executive summary. So it's a bit more clear for a reader who just picks up the cap, a little bit more about what exactly we're trying to do as we focus on a just transition.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Anyone else? Okay, Julia, I think we're ready to talk about the appendices. Yes,
Okay,
Commissioner Britton.
Can I start with a higher level question?
Yes, sir.
Are we going to have a place for a higher level discussion that is not specific to the individual contents, appendices, chapters, and strategies? Is there a place for a global comment on the entire document, its style, its sort of balance and
Yes.
writing?
And Julia, if it is okay with you and the team, I will suggest that we start with that actually, and then from there we dive into more specifics. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to single out Commissioner Britton since he got us started on that.
Mind.
I'm good like that.
So, yeah, pretty straightforward couple of things. As a science writer and reader, there's an adage we use, which is if you want someone to not understand or not see something and you're burying it in your paper, you put it in a table. And this document is littered with tables that could be figures. And I think there should be a sweep done all the way through the document, taking every table that could be turned into a figure and making it a figure. And that was particularly salient in chapter 3, but it's everywhere. Indeed, at the very end, I forget the name of the table, but the capstone table that says how we're going to achieve everything and balance that out across all the strategies is a table. That's the punchline of the entire document, and it's a table. It should be a figure. That has to be a figure. That kind of thing. Also, in terms of writing style, the whole thing was quite wordy, and I think a good copy editor, a good technical copy editor going through could shave off 10, 20, 30% of its length and increase the clarity, because lots of sentences were long and complicated with lots of clauses. And it's much more understandable if you can just write punchy, quick things and just get to the point. And it wasn't always that way. So those are the big ones. But there is also something else that's a little more technical and it's a little more specific, but it sort of underpins the whole document. And I don't know if now is the right time or whether a chapter has to do with the inventory, and the inventory underlies everything. And I don't know, I'll just toss it to our chair and the group whether a major structural problem with the inventory should be brought up now or later.
So I'll have you hold that thought for now. Okay. And I just want to first see if anyone wants to add to like the overview of the document, and then we'll come back to the inventory since it also addresses the whole document. Yes, great. Commissioner Austin.
Yeah, thank you. I know this represents a ton of work, and I really appreciate staff time, whether that's county staff or consultants. So similar to some of the high level, I appreciate you bringing that up, Commissioner Britton. So for me, the end product needs to be sort of the reverse of the engagement process, in which we do need to have a document that really addresses a lot of the technical, scientific underpinnings, things that are measurable, so we can hold ourselves accountable. However, we also realize the people who are engaging with this are engaging at different levels. You couldn't just stick this thing into a Google Translate and say, well, we've given this back to the whatever, Spanish speaking, Russian speaking, et cetera, communities that have contributed to this. I think that we also, and we've talked about this in equity engagement TAC, that it would also be helpful for that components of these get adapted in a way that is more easily digestible for the demographics of folks who have been engaging with the process, and ensuring a way for this to get back to those communities. So examples could include things like, social media carousel, so images that can be kind of scrolled through on Instagram, videos, perhaps engaging with some of our youth commission members and TAC members to help us think through engaging ways to put together videos. And so I think that there's a way to do this where we're not just asking candidly consultants to do this work, where we can look back at the very stakeholders that contributed to this to put this information out in a way that can be received, because there is both an education component as well as a accountability component that I think would be really important. So in addition to just, kind of higher level discussions, I would love for this to be accessible to a variety of, ages, education levels, literacy levels, and addressing any language barriers, et cetera.
Thank you, Bernadette. So if I may ask you a quick follow-up question, how do you suggest that this be in writing in the draft of the CAP, or are you suggesting that as an outreach strategy when implementing it and
Yeah, there's a couple of ways that we could do this, but as I see this, there's what we are doing as commissioners and that what we are bringing forth to the county supervisors. And I think that is something that could be captured in the staff report to the county supervisors, acknowledging that intention. And if there are additional resources that are required for that, asking for consideration or allocation of the resources to do that. And I'll reiterate, I would love there to be work done with local artists, people working in sort of the media spaces, and or our youth commissioners, because I think those are both reasonable things. So I'm not asking for a modification to this document, but I feel like they have to go together. If we just created a PDF, that wouldn't be responsible. And you see this movement with general plans, that things that are web-based, major components that are put out on social media. So I think there's a way to do that, and there's a precedent for it.
Thank you for clarifying. And Micah, I see your hand. Just a quick reaction, Bernadette, to what you said. Something that came to mind is keeping an eye out for opportunities to collaborate. So I'm giving a quick example. The county in the past has had, via various organizations, call for artists when it comes to murals and things like that. So these are platforms where the message of the CAP or just bringing people on board can be utilized, kind of like a cross collaboration, just an idea. And also I want to highlight what you shared regarding capturing, the high level aspect of the draft in a staff report addressed to the supervisors. I think it's a very practical suggestion. Commissioner Bennett, you have the floor. And Julia, if at any point you have clarifying questions, please interrupt us. Thank you. Commissioner Bennett?
Yes, along with some of the other comments, I agree with Commissioner Austin that it would be good to have a lot of different ways to communicate this and things that feed from this. But I think this document itself could be much, much, much more accessible. I feel like there's so much bureaucratic stuff in the first 5 chapters, and the way the language is, it just kind of sucks the life out of it. And I feel like that in itself is an equity and engagement issue, because people just don't have time to read 263 pages, especially that's so technical. I think you could get over that by reorganizing and making chapter 6 basically first. That's what I wanted to know. That's what I think a lot of people will want to know. What are the actions that you're recommending? And once you've started put out the actions, then people might get curious about, how did you come up with these ideas? What was the technical components that went into it for you? But when you just lay out all that stuff without telling them why they care first by giving them what the actions are, it's very, very hard to get into. And I also think that a lot of the technical, the question about are the appendices enough or too much and comprehensive, put everything you can into an appendix, and also do what Ken said about getting somebody to go through and make it a breezier kind of language. It says, look at this exciting plan we have that's going to help us with climate change and all the things that you've been feeling or experiencing that I've been experiencing over the last week with how hot it's been and being concerned and worried about that. And so that's the overall comment, except for one other that's kind of throughout the document. And that is, there's a lot of emphasis on farm workers, which is of course appropriate. Farm workers are frontline people that are feeling the effects of climate change, but we have lots of other outdoor workers that I think need to be acknowledged. There's maintenance work, like road work people, there's construction workers, there's warehouse workers, there's kitchen workers, there's all the landscape workers. There's all kinds of other people that are spending the variety of their days outdoors. And I think somehow having an expression of it within this document of where are those frontline communities that are feeling the impacts most heavily, and what are, in some cases, you can characterize those kind of by economics and by BIPOC and so forth. So there, I think that the document would be well served to have a discussion. So maybe like an insert or something that says there are communities that are harder hit, and then note some of the things that are being done directly to mitigate or to have adaptation for those people.
Thank you very much, Micah. So one thing that stood out amongst everything also that you shared is making the chapter 6 the first item that people are reading. Also reminding us that yes, farm workers need to be centered, but they are more categories, groups of people also working outdoors that are very impacted by the extreme weather events. And yeah, taking notes of your comments. Thank you. So we're going back to Commissioner Bennett, to Commissioner Britton.
About reversal order,
Yes, go ahead.
the chapter 6, and as understood it in the introduction from the consultants, that they were originally going to do that, and they were going to have a summary chapter, sort of a light duty version of chapter 6 leading the document. And I was wondering if that'd be consistent with what you were saying, not the details that and the long tedious lists of each action under each strategy, but a sort of a high hit on what's going to be done. Is that what you were thinking of? Because it seems like a really great idea.
That certainly, I haven't think, I don't know. Yeah, that could help, I think. But also you will have to have some introductory, you can't just jump into it with nothing. But I think that you can really quickly hit, these were the goals that were set by the supervisors. This plan was made because they said we needed to be carbon neutral. Another thing that is really buried in this is the role of the consultants. It makes it look like everything. I mean, I feel like we're almost hiding it that we had consultants. This is all from collecting it from the community. That you don't even see the name of the consultants except for they're listed as an author. So something about how the consultants worked, but all of that needs to be in a very brief introduction. And then yes, you could do something that was high level, kind of almost like a quick start for installing computer programs or whatever. And have a table of contents that, I mean, the reader's guide in this is like on page 13. So something that is at the beginning.
To Bernadette's point, it can be written in a very easy to understand language style that would during that ending reading level 6th grade or above could read.
Okay.
But there is, none of that is to overlook how much content is here and how much goes into it. And it is amazing that we're this far and we have this kind of plan. But it's more the presentation of all of the work.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett and Britton. So I'm going to be taking notes, and I'm going to have us, go further and come back to Ken regarding what you were saying with inventories, and then we'll keep digging deeper. Something I want to quickly mention is I would like to caution us. I hear what you're saying about making sure that we're not hiding the name of the consultants and so on. My personal opinion is also to make sure that, we're not, how do I say that? I'm trying to be tactful. What I'm trying to say here is wanting to make sure that we still center the voice of community members first and foremost, because their concerns and feedback has made everything that we see today possible. And in mentioning, of course, the consultants personally, and I don't know what you all think and what the staff will decide, but I see that as being appropriate either on the cover or in the beginning and then also at the very end. That personally, that's what will make sense for me. I'm gonna stop here. Yes, Micah.
Just to clarify in the comments about the consultant, just to be transparent.
Yes.
In that we worked with them and how
Of course,
they
yeah,
did work with us.
absolutely. Thank you. Julia, before we give the mic back to Ken on inventories, is there anything you wanted to add, or do you have any clarifying questions?
I don't have any clarifying questions. I do know, Ken, you were right about having the summary piece that Dudek had mentioned that they would have before the chapter 6. I think the thought was that it had been blended into the executive summary, but now that you've pointed that out, I feel the same way. So that's definitely something we can follow up with Dudek on to make it more called out. And then along with other comments as well. These are really helpful and more cater to reorganizing and calling out different pieces within the CAP. So yeah, thank you. And we can follow up on those, but agree on the little summary for chapter 6.
Thank you, Julia. So Ken, you were talking about inventories. I see Commissioner Kim as well. Yes.
Yes, before going into inventories, just quick comment on some of the comments. First, for the comment about making it accessible to as many different groups, especially the groups we got feedback for. I think that makes a lot of sense. And what I realize we're doing now more and more in politics and everything else is making videos. And I think if there could be like 3 super short videos, and there's an app that you can make videos for free. You just put like 10 slides and ask ChatGPT to like make the video for you. And it's fascinating. But 1 video in Spanish, right? And 1 video for like the bureaucrats, which could be much more technical, and 1 video that's like industry facing. And I think all of the videos having like a call to action, because when you think about a climate plan or a plan, I think business plan, there's always like, here's what we need you all to do. And so summarizing kind of, you know, this is where we're at, this is what we're trying to do, here are strategies, and here's how you can be involved and whatever that. So that's number 1 thought. Number 2 was, again, on a very, very high level, excuse me, I like on the appendices, and I'm sure we're going to cover this, I feel like there's 95% is like a bunch of good ideas, and it's like 5% is like how we're going to actually do it. And so I guess I'm a little bit concerned that the entire implementation and monitoring chapter is 1 page, and that's with like a photo, like in a picture and an image and everything, and it's like 1 page. And so I feel like I would be okay if it's like half of it was just ideas, but the other half of the plan is like, here's actually how we're going to do this, how we're going to implement it financially, or implement it with all of the mechanisms at the disposal of the county. And then number 3, I agree with all of the comments on reordering the chapters and appendices, and I think I have some ideas when we get there. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. And this is a good time also to remind all of us that Julia, we have an extended periods to have commissioners to have the one-on-one meetings with the staff and with Julia, so we can give more in-depth feedback and maybe offer our time and energy in helping some of the work to be done. Thank you, Andrew. Ken, are you ready for us?
Yeah, if we're done with all the other style stuff, I'll pick up.
I will ask
I have one little point here.
Commissioner Ullman.
I think it's really important to understand the mindset and the attitudes of our audience as we can anticipate who's going to look at this document and think to themselves, wow, the way I live, the way I work, the way I make my living is going to be impacted by some of the solutions that are mentioned here. And I think we need to deliver the message that we are sensitive to that, how we frame these, why we frame them, the fact this is an agricultural county. And this gets to the heart of a question that I've asked at least 3 times in the course of these commission meetings, and I know Supervisor Provence has asked it a couple of times, and that is, what about the cities? And getting back to the style issue really quickly, I will say, and it's one of my comments here, the use of the term municipal. When it comes to municipal inventory, municipal to me, and I think on the street, means cities. I would suggest using another term for this, but if I'm a farmer and I'm saying, wow, I see a lot of good things here. I can wrap my head around a lot of these things, but I'm going to be asked to shoulder a lot of burden here in terms of carbon farming and some of the other solutions that are mentioned. I want to know first and foremost, what's the impact going to be on me? And then, is this practical? And how do I implement it? And who's going to help me implement it? And that sort of thing. So as we move down from the conclusions, and I agree wholeheartedly that drinking from a fire hose here is not the solution. Look at any magazine style, or what we would now call Webby presentation. You see lots of infographics. You see sidebars that summarize a lot of the verbiage, point, maybe the top 3 things. You see an introduction that quickly summarizes everything. But at the same time, if I'm a farmer today, I'm interested in the technical background. I want to know, where do I go now to see, I want to do a deeper dive on this particular issue. Then you need to bring those links to the appendices up and not simply present a column of data, but show me how, what is the tool here, Comet Planner, lift the hood for me and show me a couple of proformas on how Comet Planner could work on an 80-acre field, growing, pick a crop. And then I can kind of understand that. And then I can say, well, I can plug into this. Okay. I think the motivations are there, but the practical issues can't be discounted. And the style, I think the point about style is very important. I did this for 30 years for semiconductor industry. It was where you would take hours of presentations and try to digest them into a 2,000-word article that somebody would put their byline on. Some engineer would put his byline on it. It's not easy. But it can be done. And so anyway, that's it. I'm not going to belabor it, but I think that right to the audience, I think, is the operative principle here, and understand what their concerns are. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate your feedback. And that brings back, for me, the reality that the fact that we won't be meeting in July doesn't mean that we won't be busy implementing all the changes and suggestions received. So thank you again. Any additional reaction before we go back to Ken's remarks? Commissioner
Just to
Reid.
give a sense of where I'm at, I agree with everything that's been said. So you know, less is more. Some things are in the document that should just go in the appendices, and some things are in the appendices should be brought forward in terms of our concerns and interest in equity and a just transition. And I agree with the recommendation on reordering. Really, all they need to know is why, you know, what we did, how we did it, why we did it, and go to the strategies, because that's what they're going to be interested in and what is going to, you know, tell them what's happening to me and how's it going to impact me. I think that the storyboards that you used for the workshops are a good start at sort of doing a summary of what the major strategies are going into each sector that could represent, you know, the framework of measures that are proposed in the more detailed piece. So couldn't be more on board with what everyone's saying.
Thank you, Commissioner Reid. Commissioner Dattel?
Yeah, I would echo what Suzanne said, what Commissioner Reid said. I agree that this is not the people's climate action plan. Just the term executive summary sounds like it's pointed at, not at the people. So I think we do have some work to do in terms of rearranging material. I love the idea that Commissioner Bennett brought up, that we really put the actions up front. I did want to mention something that speaks to people's ideas about using other media to communicate this as well. I had a conversation with Autumn Labbe-Renault, who runs Davis Community Media, and she told her that our draft plan is now out, and she's very interested in having them play a role in outreach. And there's all different kinds of things they help people do in terms of media. I think that would be a great partner going forward. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Dattel.
Can I just add one thing?
Yes.
That is super great. I just wanted to chime in that the executive summary is actually called a cap at a glance. We've just been referring it to as the executive summary. So tomato, tomato, but in the cap, it's called the cap at a glance section.
Thank you, Julia. That's helpful. Commissioner Kim. Ken, I promise we're going to come back to you. Commissioner Kim.
A very radical idea, so hopefully I don't get in trouble. But if we're really thinking about the user or the reader, and the greatest value to them is for them to be able to read it without being discouraged, I think this plan could be actually broken into two separate documents. One, which is like the plan, which is here's what we're going to do and here's how we're going to do it, and maybe a little bit intro of like why we're doing it. And then the second thing is called like the report. And the report is really about here's the background on climate action, here's the background on adaptation, here's the background on the state of natural working lands, here's the background on how we came up with this plan. But for the people who are just interested in the plan, they could just read the plan and it's like 30 pages. And then there's like
Or
the
less.
report or less ideal. Like it doesn't have more isn't necessarily better, but like for then people who want to read the plan, they're like, oh, the plan, 30 pages. And you can remove all of the graphics and the images and you don't need a cover, like make it really short. So someone's like, oh, I could read this in one sitting versus like 260 pages. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to take time off work. Like I'll get to this next week or something. So I think but I think there are people who are going to be interested in all of the background, but I think that's more of like a report on the state of how we either came up with the plan or why we had to come up with the plan or what, some of the other elements of the plan are. But I think if there's a way where all of the chapters related to like what I'm calling the business plan is all up front and like in a way where people like, oh, you only need to read the first 30 pages to get the plan, the gist of the plan.
Thank you, Commissioner Kim. So in my head, business plan, I'm calling it cap at a glance. Just kidding here. Commissioner Britton.
All right. The main concern I had, I noticed quickly the difference between the agricultural emissions in the 2022 inventory that is anchoring this document and all the previous agricultural emissions. And including the most recent 2016 one. I did a little digging on that, and it was immediately apparent that 2022 was a drought year, a bad drought year. And I looked at the Davis report, and half the acreage of rice in the county was fallow that year because there was no water for it. And the cattle herd was half of what it was in 2021, according to USD estimates of what cattle were. So it was basically a year that agriculture was sitting idle in this county. And thus those emissions are vastly underestimated in the inventory. And I'm not going to be asking, I don't think, I would love to, if we had time, if they could do it, if they have a workflow that would allow it, I would love to see Dudek go back through and do a better estimate, take that bias out with a little averaging or something, and then turn the handle and get all the new estimates from that. That's a ton of work, and I have a feeling they will build a county another $500,000 to do it. So that seems like too much to ask, but I would ask for it anyway, right? That's a place to start with. But at the very least, the people who are implementing this document, and that's everyone, that's people in the county, that's the farmers, that's everybody, needs to know that there's a problem here and that certain things are going to be made more important because of this bias in the inventory. Some things will become less important. But for instance, some of the priorities that are put on different things might very well change depending on that particular factor. The amount of power that we have to actually improve the emissions, not just do carbon farming and do sequestration, but actually improve our emissions profile will be bigger. Although the emissions will be higher, we have more that we can do about it as well. And I think that needs to be brought front and center somehow. And I'm happy to work with whoever's going to be doing the writing to see. And I have some suggestions in the written stuff I sent in to Julia. On where that could go, but I'm not sure that's final at all. But I think it's really important. And likewise, Juliet's point about the Tykert plant and the concrete, that should be at least be in the inventory. I hadn't even known that was not, because it's strictly in the purview of this document, right? It's a non-municipal source. It's out of town, and it's a major carbon source. And I thought it was in the inventory, but I am not certain it isn't, but since Juliet seemed to have looked at that pretty hard, that's another point where the inventory could be highly biased.
Thank you, Ken. So before I give the mic to Commissioner Ullman, I just want to quickly share this. Your comment, in my opinion, is a good reminder to all of us, including our community at large, that the CAP is a living document, meaning that what we're discussing today and what the final writing of the CAP is going to be is bound to change as we're making implementation. So it's just something I encourage us to keep in mind. And the reason I'm saying that is because, of course, I believe that the point you made about, the emissions, the inventory of emissions and the impact of the year 2022 and how that should be reflected in the recommendation that I made. One of the ways I see this moving forward, just sharing briefly, is a recommendation being made to the Board of Supervisors to authorize, that work, knowing that, because you're right, I don't believe that realistically this is something that can be done with the budget we have right now and done in time for the final draft of the CAP to be presented to the Board of Supervisors. But I think that it's always possible to make a recommendation for our board to authorize it, and with the knowledge that as we start implementing what will be approved of the final version of the CAP, we will look for ways to have that information be integrated in the work moving forward. So this is just my, initial reaction to what you shared. And then I want to welcome Supervisor Provenza. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. We're happy to see you. And Commissioner, I'm going to go back to Commissioner Ullman very briefly also on what Commissioner Kim had shared earlier. I noticed that many of you were reacting in support and quite positively. So again, just an encouragement. If you have not yet met an appointment with Julia and you have more that you want to share, please make sure you do so in time. So Commissioner Ullman, we are listening.
Thanks, Ken. I want to address what you brought up here just in detail a moment. The first meeting I attended when we were still meeting by Zoom, I brought up the issue of gravel mining. And that promoted a discussion by the supervisors who were attending the meeting, went back to the board and came back to us and said that that particular project, which is now, by the way, still under litigation, was specifically out of scope.
I remember that discussion.
And that frustrated me no end. However, I can accept that, okay? But what I will say is that this plan, to be germane and effective, has to realize the fact that business as usual approaches are going to be our worst enemy when it comes to achieving this extremely ambitious goal that has been set in front of us. I think that mining in general, which is mentioned in some of the tables, vehicle miles traveled, which that engenders, other projects which increase VMTs with all of their greenhouse gas implications need to be considered. Every decision made by the County Planning Commission and the board needs to have an indicator for the climate impact of this matter. similar to the fiscal impact statement that we see quite a bit already. And if we did that, I think we'd be better for it. As far as the mining is concerned, that's a major industrial effort. That particular project was estimated to generate potentially millions of heavy truck trips. And when I brought that up in earlier meetings of this commission, I'm told that someday we'll have electric trucks.
If
I
I could
remember the-
respond. Oh, go ahead, Ken.
If I remember the discussion, it was we were not allowed to chime in on the approval of a particular expansion of that mining project.
Mhm.
And I think that's entirely separate from whether the emissions of Tykert overall and all the mining activities in the county should be part of the inventory, which they unquestionably should. And that is in our purview, and it is in, and I remember the supervisors specifically saying we're not engaged in anything but generating the cap.
Mhm.
Fair point, and I believe that's right, but that is part of those emissions have to be part of the cap. And so I agree with you completely, but let's separate it from the planning and implementation stuff, which is to follow. But if we ignore those emissions now, then
Mhm.
we can't do any implementation that's sensible later. So, yeah, that's,
Thank you, Ken. And I will chime in also very briefly. And Julia, before we hear from you, Commissioner Reid would like to weigh in. So a couple of things. So very briefly for Supervisor Provenza. So we are discussing kind of like the overview first of the CAP, and we'll be diving into specifically the appendices, the chapters, chapter 6, and then the feedback on chapters in general, and then we have a special focus on chapter 6. So we are at the end of the kind of like general feedback on the whole document. And then also on the, Tykert items. So if my memory serves me well, I think they have been brought up in our Climate Action Commission's meetings at least 3 times that I remember in various ways. I second everything that was said out of our scope of work. But also we have discussed in the past the fact that they need to be a part of the GHG emissions inventory. And I want to admit that I personally have not followed up on whether that was the case. I did assume that, that will be taken into account at some point. So if it is okay, Julia, I will ask you to please make a note, and then whenever that will be possible, right? To please just let us know whether, because we do need confirmation whether or not it's something that is missing from the current inventory. So at least if we have that information, that will be helpful.
it could be sitting
I
there
can
in the
respond.
off-road equipment.
Okay, yes, Julia, we're listening.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, was that the greenhouse gas emissions from mining operations were not included in the inventory. But to be more specific, we have the category in the off-road equipment sector called construction and mining. So equipment greenhouse gas emissions are included, but the other parts of the mining process are not. And I was told that this was due to the fact that the emissions from mining operations are they're regulated at the federal level. So that's why that they were not included in those calculations.
Thank you, Julia. Commissioner Reid?
Yeah, I mean, interesting. They're still emissions. So it's like, I don't care who regulates them. We don't regulate the cars either. So I agree with everything you're saying. And the other thing about 2022, I mean, is if there's characterizations that need to happen to explain what the factors are that influence the 2022 baseline, then we need to make them. I mean, the whole concept here is that we're going to be transparent and inclusive. So I agree with that. It seems that also, depending on the timeframe in 2022 that the emissions were measured, the economy wasn't necessarily back up and running full steam at that point. People were still working remotely and those kinds of things. So there are other probably factors that should be noted as we put forth the emissions inventories in each of the categories.
Thank you, Commissioner Reid. Quick break here, pause, to let you all know that it is 5:05 p.m. So we have spent about an hour discussing the overview and the global, framework of the CAB. So just you bear that in mind. Are we ready to talk about the appendices? Your silence is a yes, and I heard a verbal yes from Commissioner Reed. Turning to Supervisor Provenza, again, thank you for being with us today. Is there anything you would like to share with us before we move forward? If you don't mind, thank you very much.
Well, just thank you for your work on this. And I don't know that really anything is beyond your purview at this point. You're recommending a climate action plan that the board will have to vote on, but I think you're well within your rights as a commission that we've appointed to make whatever recommendations you feel are appropriate.
Thank you, Supervisor Provenza. Julia is trying to locate a microphone for you, just so you know. Okay, so let's talk about the appendices, and Commissioner Kim, Vice Chair Kim, you have the floor on anything you want to address, actually.
Well, just now being re-empowered by Supervisor Provenza, I think it actually now seems really strange that, that this cap doesn't account for one of the most intense industries in the county that is within the county jurisdiction. And so, and it just being a subsection of a section of off-road equipment doesn't seem like the most appropriate place. I think and then, so on that note, I think I initially wanted to respond to Commissioner Brin on the fact that he mentioned that the baseline for 2022 should account for the drought. So the first question back to Julia and then to the DUDAC, the consultant team, is, does that, account for the fact that that is specifically a drought year? And if not, is there a way for them to make a notation that that was specifically a drought year? And so certain, of the inventories need to account for that. But back to the whole issue of gravel mining and what have you, I mean, there's not many industries in the county. That is one of the industries that is active in this county. And I feel like there should be a bigger role in this plan accounting for that. And I say that recently empowered by Supervisor Provenza. Now that he's here, I wanted to share my major concern again, so he can hear my thoughts, which is there is 260 pages on ideas, but 2 pages on implementation. And yeah, so I think that it's very lopsided on a lot of great ideas, but how are we going to get this actually done? And I'll share more when we get to that point.
Thank you, Commissioner Kim. I'm going to say it again, appendices.
Okay, so this is an appropriate time. So yeah, appendices.
You're on a roll.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the plan, the appendices are written in a way where everything has been given equal weight. But when you look at financing and budget, and when you look at implementation and monitoring, it is much lighter than any of the other appendices. When you look at the chapters as well, significantly lighter. And I mean, that may be by design, or just maybe there's some concern that there's not enough meat there. I feel like there's a lot of technical details on all of the strategies and ideas and background, but when it comes to, any details on how we're gonna implement this. And I think even if it doesn't lay out, oh, these are the exact ordinances or, initiatives that we need to do, but mentioning what other county initiatives or what other county projects, because, and when I do look at the implementation, how it's currently framed, I think it's not fully comprehensive. I think it's, it doesn't account for certain types of ordinances or moratoriums or certain types of, county and city policies and various programs and projects, and some of the other ways that it could be funded as well. And so my major request is for both the appendices and the chapters, for both the the element of the actual plan, which is what is it and how are we going to do it, that being towards the top. And on that note, for how it's done, I feel like if DUDAC could put a little bit more meat on the bones there.
Thank you, Commissioner Kim. Anyone wants to add to that? Yes, Commissioner Britton.
Comment that implementation is super important. And it's an agenda item on one of our late meetings here. After the supervisors look at the plan, we have to decide, us and the county staff have to go forward to how are we going to implement this through the phases. That's a big thing. It's huge, and it's more important than this document, if I can say so. But we can't do it now. And I don't think we should ask them to put it all the possibilities, because there are many. It's a big and complicated problem that has to be thought about hard and then distilled and then this is like a menu that we're getting here in the CAP, right? And then we're going to only eat one meal because the county doesn't have resources to do everything.
Yeah.
And that is what implementation is about. It's tricky. It's going to be political, and it's going to be super important. And I think we should actually wait on it until this document is done and dusted, and then we'll talk about implementation. I think that's what DUDEC wants us to do, and I think it's what the county staff, and please, Julia, anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is the overall overarching plan here for this commission, and it's either its child, which was going to be birthed out of us, or maybe a new commission for implementation, and I'll stop there.
Yes, I'll have Julia react. I thank you both for the comments, Andre and you. That was a very interesting image you chose there. Something to add again, you'll hear me say that again at, upcoming meetings and so on. So yes, to what Andre said, of course, we need to have to be clear on how we're going to implement the CAP. Back to also this being a living document, and that, to the fact that more will be added on as we move forward appropriately. And also reminder of that the focus right now is, overall goals, guidelines, and so on. Supervisor Provenza.
Yes, thank you. The input I received from my staff is that it would be helpful to, as to various measures, be some indication of the difficulty of implementing. And I know you've touched on that. Cost is an issue, but just in terms of all the factors, which are more difficult, which are maybe medium, and which are easy to implement. That would be helpful to know going into this.
Thank you, Supervisor Provenza. That takes me back also to the 9 strategies and the metrics that we had put in place in determining the order of priority when it comes to implementation. Another thing also briefly, when it comes to finances and how the measures, and ideas will be financed, right? Very important document. I think that ties into, Mark, what you mentioned when you talked about, the ag sector, but also the fact that the county has municipalities within it. This item seems like a good time also to remind us that there is a collaborative that was formed during the process of the writing of the draft of the CAP between the county, right, the sustainability team, and various cities in the county, Davis, Winters, Woodland, where they are coming together to see how the different CAPs in the county align, but also to pursue fundings, to implement not just the county CAP, but also in a way that will benefit the cities, because what's happening in the cities will be impacting the CAP. Commissioner Kim.
Yes, just to respond to Commissioner Brin and a question to Julia. So I actually agree that adding the implementation may actually make this document even way longer and way more difficult to be accessible. The question is DUDAC going to write after this? So, because I do see this as 2 pieces, one being like the proposal of the strategies and one being the implementation plan. Is DUDAC going to prepare then an implementation plan after this process, as Commissioner Brin was inferring? Because that wasn't clear to me.
Clarifying question before Julia answers. Clarifying question to Andrew. Are you asking that, keeping in mind that the DEX contract is coming to an end at the end of the summer? Or I'm just thinking in terms of timeline. Is that your
Yes.
thinking?
So two-part question, like, is the implementation process, which I agree, we haven't had that discussion yet, because I think first you have to get approval on like the proposal. Like, here's our proposal of what's going to be on the menu. And then the next part is here's how we're going to implement it. And I agree, like trying to go over that today is going to be a little bit too much. But the question is, let's say we get the proposal agreed, now when it comes to like, here's all of the ways we're going to implement it by these deadlines, by these different approaches, is that going to be on this document as part of the plan? Or is DUDAC preparing a separate document called the implementation plan?
Julia?
UDEC is not preparing a second document, but this would be something that Kristen and I, we've talked about just considering different advisory committees or just having another, group of, interested commission members or things like that, support on an effort like that. I do have more that I think I could share on the implementation side of things, but I would have to pull that up from conversations that Chris and I have had, but no, at the moment, DUDEC will be done after their contract date, which I believe is the end of September.
Thank you, Julia. And of course, that doesn't mean that the suggestion Andrew made is not going to be explored and acted upon, right?
Yes.
Okay, Andrew, does that answer your question for now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Britton.
And quick defense of DUDEC, that in each of the strategies, there is a little sort of bang for buck prioritization of that gets partly to Supervisor Provenza's point. How hard is it? How expensive is it going to be? Is it revenue neutral or not? And those are all going to be important things. And there is a list of those that we will have to consider as we talk about implementation.
Thank you, Commissioner Britton. My voice changed here. I wasn't getting emotional, but okay. Julia, I do have a question for you. Is there any specific, a specific appendix you want us to talk about at this time?
I don't have a specific appendix that I had. I was more curious about the flow of the appendices, and then a lot of you have already touched on this, but just the need for potentially chapters to be shorter, for things to be pulled into the appendix or taken out. So I think I would be interested in people's thoughts on the flow of the appendices, and if there are appendices that people think that we should cut or move information around, and if it's clear how everything is organized and if it's able to be understood well.
Thank you. While people on the floor are reflecting on your question, thinking about it, do we have any reactions from anyone online that is not a member of the public?
We do not, no.
Okay, thank you. So I'm turning back to the floor in the room. Anyone? What do you think of the flow of, the appendices? Commissioner Reed, then Commissioner Ullman.
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult to determine because we've already decided that we don't like the arrangement of the chapters. So once we get, the appendices should be in the order in which they're referenced by the chapters. So I don't think it's fruitful to talk about it now. Back to one of the problems that I have with the way it's written now, the whole thing it's written now, is that it's too much like a textbook, like they're trying to educate and inform people and so it's like, we did this instead of that, and that explaining that. I don't know if you didn't do that, I don't want to know about it. I don't care. This is the way you did it. That's fine. That's what I need to know. So there's just a lot that can be taken out, I think, everywhere as we go through it. And I don't have anything specific about any particular appendix other than criteria that should be applied to looking at the appendices is, do they provide the documentation that is relevant to the decisions that we made. Are they clear? Are they understandable? Are they presented in a comprehensible way? After that, I don't need a lot of extra stuff.
Thank you, Suzanne. So what you just said takes me back to Ken's point regarding the suggestion of a copywriter looking at the document and, slimming down the parts that are repetitive or not needed. Commissioner Ullman?
Yeah, we are going to get into some technical detail here at some point, not in this meeting, but in the acceptance of the cap. The appendices, in my view, are to answer the question, where's the beef? Okay. I think that it would be preferential to see them reside on the web and not be published in a binder somewhere, because they're going to be subject to change and updating and new information that's going to be available. I think there should be some certain criteria applied to them. Very good sourcing, for example, on where this information is coming from. But we're going to be getting down into some data-driven discussion at some point. So there has to be a level where that's accessible. And it would show me, if I were the audience here, especially in the agricultural sector, that we're talking about, maybe we're talking about something that's practical. And I want to look into it further. And there are plenty of avenues to do that. But I want to just reiterate that it's really important to try to gain in the cap itself. One of our challenges is going to be write it in such a way that it leads to understanding and acceptance. We're all passionately interested in this topic. Everybody in this commission, certainly the consultants are, they live it, they breathe it every day. As a result of that, sometimes you fall into the trap of writing something almost to someone else that's passionately interested in, has a depth of understanding of these topics, where you need to say, well, let's take a step back and write it for somebody who has not been immersed in these topics for the last 3 years. They've been too busy planting tomatoes or almonds or worried about prices and that sort of thing. What am I going to do with my orchard? That's the audience. That's one of them. There's many segments here. I can get, I'm not going to go into the details of my comments here, but I think that it's very important to write to your audience in a way that leads them into the topic, but then in the appendices, give them that information that they need to drill down and really look at it in greater detail. And so I think that there needs to be some flexibility built into the appendix process.
Thank you, Mark. Commissioner Kim, then Commissioner Austin.
You were at.
You were first.
Already sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, just to respond to Commissioner Ullman, because I've been writing some ideas of what that could be, and I totally agree, because with both Commissioner Reed and Commissioner Ullman, that this is currently reads like a textbook where it's assuming everyone is going to read every chapter, every page. But I think it should be written more like a business proposal. And for a business proposal, people only read as much as they want to read. And like, if they're not interested by section 2, they're not reading the rest. So we have to try to front load the most important information. And if they're interested on more of the background on why and how, then they can go continue reading. But I fear that by front loading all of the background and all of the this, that, the other in the front, people are going to lose interest because it's just so much information. Like, what are we even talking about here? Right. And then so I think it's better to just be, as a matter of fact, like, here's the plan. I think, yeah. So chapter 1, I still think should be the introduction. And this is going to the point that talking about the appendices, I agree, may not be as useful as just talking about the chapters, because the appendices should follow the order of the chapters. So chapter 1 should be introduction. I think Commissioner Brin's suggestion, chapter 2 should be strategies, measures, and actions. I agree. I think chapter 3, which is the funding, financing, and chapter 3, chapter 4, implementation and monitoring. And then everything else is really just background. And so it could be background on climate action as chapter 6, a background on climate adaptation, background on natural working lands, and background on the communication, engagement, equity. But I guess we could put that first because we want to center, equity in community engagement. So we could talk about that background being first, then climate action, natural working lands, and climate. I'd probably do climate action, climate adaptation, and actually that's up for debate. But the point is the background should be on the lower half, and then the actual plan should be on the upper half. Because like if you're a business writer, like, and you're reading a business proposal, if I get all this background, but you're not gonna even read the proposal. So.
Thank you, Kim. Andrew, sorry. Ooh. Okay, so to clarify on the feedback you just shared, you were saying, just want to make sure I get in the right order. Chapter 1, introduction, chapter 2 focuses on strategies. And then there was a bit of a mix-up, which is why I'm asking for clarification. Chapter 3, you initially said financing, and then you said chapter 3 and chapter 4, monitoring and implementation. So the clarification is chapter 3, financing, and then another chapter or chapters on monitoring and implementation?
Well, yeah, if we're following that order. So right now, funding and financing is chapter 7. I'm suggesting that being chapter 3, implementation monitoring is chapter 8, which made that chapter 4.
Okay.
But that chapter is so light that could just be combined with another chapter. But hopefully we're able to engage DUDAC as much as possible. So after this discussion, we can get some of their thoughts on implementation as well. But again, not a discussion today, but yeah, that being chapter 4, and then chapter 5 being equity engagement, chapter 6, climate action. Actually, it would probably be my proposal, chapter 5, equity engagement, then chapter 6, natural and working lands, then chapter 7, climate adaptation, and then climate action. Because climate action people probably have the most understanding of. And so that could be the very last background item. And then the one that people know the least about being equity engagement, that could be the first background item, natural working land, second background item. And yeah, in that order.
Thank you. And I'm noting also with what you just shared that you made us transition from appendices to also talking about the different chapters. So that's what we are discussing right now. Commissioner Austin, you have the floor.
Yeah, the first thing I'll say is I was actually going to come up with a very similar analogy. When I've advised researchers on how to put together an effective policy brief, I tell them right at the opposite direction as an academic white paper, which is you start with the findings. And then when that's the big piece, then you get to the methodology and the background when it goes the opposite direction with academic writing. But that's actually not what I wanted to talk about. I also want to really recenter the conversation. I'm a pragmatist in many respects. And I am not interested in blowing through our consultant budget with a bunch of guess and check edits. So I think what I love is that this conversation has been really focused on some concrete and specific ways to update this document and some recommendations on which include mine, that if there's anything that we can have where we are essentially paying county staff or paying community partners, I'm very interested in that. I really want to make sure that we're not just spending all this money on updating a document. And one thing related to what we've been discussing is I've talked about how, general plans, because that's such a giant, historically inaccessible document, is looking at some of the modern ways that people are posting plans like this. And so a simple thing is not just to have what order are the pages of a PDF. If we have a somewhat accessible website, of course, within the boundaries of what we've got already available through the county, there is a way to, have things searchable where you have different links. And so that this living document that Chair Mavondo keeps talking about, that's a way to do this. So we can say, okay, so, here are the findings, and maybe there's a snapshot of the findings, and then you can get links to strategy 1, strategy 2. You could have all of the equity considerations and equity solutions so that there's ways to link things in such a way that bite-sized pieces are very easy to find and highly accessible. That doesn't require a complete rewrite of the documents here, but it makes it easy so that if I am a farmer, if I am a concerned young person, I can find the thing that I'm most interested in without having to dig through. So I think that there's ways to easily adapt some really good work that's happened. I think I do want to say, I think that there is some rewriting that is required so that this is digestible. So that doesn't mean, again, I don't want to have us say, okay, consultant, could you spend another 400 hours rewriting this document? I'm really concerned like that. That would be a bad use of time. I feel like a better use of time is to reorganize some of the components we're talking about. And then when I talk about this living document, some of these big pieces, so I'm not saying that we're not going to do that, but we've raised very real concerns about how are we measuring this? Let's create space on our website so that when that additional work happens, here's what we've got so far. This work has been done, and then we can link, make that historical, and then here's the most current, whatever emissions measurements. So I think that there's a way to do this where, again, if you're leveraging bite-sized piece, you can still have the full document, whatever that ends up looking like, but have these bite-sized pieces in a way that is logical, particularly thinking about who the end user is. So if I am, working in the agricultural industry, if I am working in the transportation and logistics industry, I want to be able to find and not feel like the county is making it intentionally hard for me, because I think we're all saying that's not our goal. Our goal is not to make it harder for residents and stakeholders to understand, access this, follow it, hold those people who are in decision-making positions accountable. I think that there's a way to make these accessible and usable. So just simple things like a website with the kind of intended audiences and with links. That's where you can embed videos. That's where you can put snapshots of the key explanatory graphics and perhaps the links on the graphics. So I think talking with, again, our county staff, let's pay our county staff to look at how we can adapt these pieces onto the website so that we're not spending all of our remaining budget on rewriting an inaccessible PDF.
Thank you, Commissioner Austin. So highlights on what you shared, what is standing out for me. Again, centering the importance of centering, making the document as accessible as possible. And then you echoed something I believe Commissioner Bennett and I think also Commissioner Daddle were pointing out, which is again to making sure that we're highlighting how industries are impacted or involved in the pact and making it easy for them, for people working in the sectors to read what is of concern. And my thinking is also the CAP is always, in my opinion, also meant as an invitation to community-based partner in letting them know how they can contribute and so on. Before I give the floor to Commissioner, was that Commissioner Ullman? So give me please a few minutes. I want to take advantage of our time together to once again give a shout out to Amy Nguyen. Hi, okay, so what I want to, the reason I'm singling you out right now is just again as a reminder that we have been fortunate to have a member of the planning department also joining the sustainability team part-time. And Amy, correct me if I'm wrong and feel free if you want to address us to, use the mic, but I understand that you also do have a planning, a background when it comes to CAP writing. Is it something you've done in the past or? Okay. Here we go. Thank you. That's what I was not remembering correctly is your background in when it comes to environmental policies and so on, which I think will be very helpful to the work we're doing. So I was mentioning that, Bernadette, because everything that you shared just reminds me of what Amy might be able to contribute in her work with the sustainability team. So just sharing that as a way forward. Commissioner Ullman.
Yeah, I guess I had a question for you. Were you referring to the web dashboard in your comments or the structure of the CAP itself?
Both. What I'm saying is that what we have on the website and how we structure it will be actually more important than the order of a final PDF.
I agree with that. Yeah. I think that the purpose of that, you can provide points of entry for a lot of different constituencies that way, and they can drive right down to what they want to what they're particularly interested in. But I also I'm probably going to make my last comment here, and I do want to say before leaving the room, I'm exceedingly proud of Yolo County for undertaking this effort. When I called Taro, when I was asked by Supervisor Sandy years ago to represent his district on this commission, I said, wow, this is really quite a goal. carbon neutrality by 2030. And he said, no, that's not carbon neutrality. It's carbon negative by 2030. And I could have fallen out of my chair. And the implication of that is extremely big news. It is, this is statewide, if not nationwide leadership for a county of this size and the nature of Yolo County here to do this. And I know there's a lot of intricacy to it, and there's going to be a lot of rough edges, whatnot. But I'm very proud of Yolo County for undertaking it, and I'm super happy to be a part of it. So I just wanted to say that before leaving. So
Thank you, appreciate it. I would like to hear if there are any final words on chapters in general or on a specific chapter before we dive into chapter 6. Commissioner Britton.
I have a question. I think one of our most important reader constituencies is represented reasonably well in this room, and that's the Board of Supervisors, who are busy people and are very interested in what we're doing here. And I'm wondering if you have any advice or thoughts on the reorganization or the organization of this document, what would make it most useful for you as you think about funding the various parts of this and prioritizing, because you're more important than we are.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the work of the commission. I'm really impressed by this discussion. I think you know exactly what needs to be done, and I'm in agreement with what I heard. I'm thinking, and it sounds as if when we talk about the document, an executive summary would also be helpful, because some, whether they're in the public or even working for the county, won't necessarily get past that. So at least if you could get those points across in executive summary. I like the links. I like the idea that somebody who's interested in the agriculture could focus on that and then link to a lot more detail and specific recommendations. And I think having things that we actually are tasked as a county with doing is going to be important. Initially, when we did set the net negative by 2030, we established this commission that was part of the resolution. And I think the understanding with the board was that when you did the plan, that's the commission's work is over. However, we did say we will reevaluate at that time and consider continuing the commission in one form or another after that, as it goes into an implementation phase, which I personally would favor. And I think the board would too, because of the excellent work that you've done. But I think staying involved for implementation, keeping us on task, because as you say, we deal with a lot of things every day. And then knowing what's most important, what's the first thing that we have to do, if we're getting to this negative by 2030, we're doing a lot of things at once. So what are the priorities? What has to happen when, and how are we going to do it? And I know that's a big task, but you've done a great job getting us this far.
Thank you, Supervisor Provenza. Commissioner Bennett.
Sorry, I was out of the room and hope I'm not getting us all out of order or anything, but a comment on chapter 5 is that I did not understand the graphic at 5.1 at all. And I don't know if other people had that same problem, but I could not tell what it was supposed to be telling us about evaluating actions for adaptation. And I also, agreeing with everything that Commissioner Austin has said about not wanting to do a lot of rewriting and so forth, I feel like chapter 5 sets out a lot of risks / threats, and we've identified a lot of adaptations, but you can't relate them to they're all in chapter 6, and you would have to go through and look for where it says it's an adaptation. So it's hard to tell what we've said to as recommendations for how to deal with these particular threats. So it might still be good to have within chapter 5 for each of those threats, tables or something that tell us what adaptations that we've recommended, partly to make sure that we haven't left anything out, because I kind of feel like maybe there are a few things there that we may not have addressed at all.
Thank you, Micah. So reactions from commissioners on what Commissioner Bennett said regarding chapter 5, and then you also had us transition into chapter 6, so thank you for that. Anyone else had some difficulties, challenges with that chapter? Commissioner Dattel?
Yeah, I hardly second exactly what was just said. That graphic is indecipherable. on page 65. And I also think this is a nice illustration of what Commissioner Austin was talking about in terms of links. So somebody who was interested in wildfire could read this little summary of the challenges and risks, and then also link to the various actions that are solutions to that. But all of that work definitely needs to be done to put that together so that people don't have to themselves scroll through the document and find each of the pieces where aspects of wildfire are mentioned.
Thank you. Julia, do you have any follow-up or clarifying question before Commissioner Austin takes the floor?
At this time, no, but thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Austin.
Just in response to your question about our, a concurrence with Commissioner Bennett's comments, I do think that a strong at a glance executive summary that we were referring to, I think a strong version of that would make it so that we can do some of these moving chapters around, and so people have a baseline for it. So I think they're not mutually exclusive. There's a lot writing on this at a glance of hopefully less than 30 pages. And candidly, I might recommend that in what I have generally found that is 5 pages is kind of that magic length, because if you ask your county staff in another department, if you ask engineering, civil engineering, hey, can you read this document? And you hand them a 30-page, I'm going to guarantee you they're not going to read it. But if you hand them, it's about 5 pages, maybe 10. And people can, again, if we make it some sort of, interface that's easier to use, then at least then they can go for, okay, so here's what this plan is saying, and then they can go for other components.
Thank you, Bernadette. Okay, I'm still mulling your words over. Julia, I have a clarifying question for you at this point. So I'm still reflecting on what several commissioners expressed here when it comes to thinking also in the work of this commission, in the invitation to integrate and be mindful of staff time. How can, staff contribute to the work, the finalization of this document? So the clarifying question has to do with the green team. Would you please let us know if the feedback that you've heard on that particular aspect of, mobilizing county staff time and work efficiently, is this something that you think falls under the purview of what is known as a green team, meaning the interest by pretty much, I think, all of the county's department, the interest in the CAP and wanting to know how the CAP fits into the work of their specific department, what they can do to help contribute to the work. One of the things that came out of that was that tax from the landfill, right? So with what you've heard, do you think that the green team is something where there is an intersection of the work that is being done or not? Just for clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. The green team is our main source of that. And as we move into implementation, we'll be a lot more active. We've been discussing the CAP division and department assignments as a team. Those were sent to the green team at the beginning of June. And then we've had a meeting to go through what makes sense for people. It's never fun telling people, or asking them to hop on board and add more work to their plate, but we've been talking with the green team that this is an iterative process. We are still looking for funding, but there are conversations moving forward about how we might break into little, subgroups of different department and division heads to work on some of these actions that we have. So we have division and department assignments for every action within the CAP. They're just under review right now. But yeah, to answer your question, as we move into implementation, that's who we will be working with. A lot of it will be, a majority of it will be a lead with the sustainability division to organize. But as we move into implementation, that's the current plan, is to be working interdepartmentally.
Thank you. Appreciate your feedback on that. Commissioner Britton, did you want to add something? I saw you raise your hand.
I do want to say, though, I have to leave in about 5 minutes here,
Okay.
unfortunately.
So I'm going to keep that in mind. We have about 15 minutes left in our time together. I want to make sure I'm leaving time for public comment as well. Could I take Supervisor Comenda's? Yeah. Supervisor Provenza, sorry.
Well, thank you. And we're talking about being able to implement this and holding ourselves, holding the board accountable, holding staff accountable, there should be 3 questions on any action item that you should be able to answer in order for it to actually happen. What needs to be done? Who should do it? And when should it be done? Without those 3 things, the goals just drift away. And if it's something the board needs to do, you need to tell us what we need to do, when we need to do it, and how we need to do it. If it's staff, who on staff, what department, what individuals. Because that, and if you look at our new county strategic plan, that's kind of how it's constructed, so that there is accountability for each action item. I like to say, and I've learned over the years, that if everyone's responsible, then no one's responsible. There has to be particular department, the board, whoever's responsible, and we have to know when it's going to occur and what's going to occur in order for these things to actually happen.
Thank you, Supervisor Provenza. And this takes me back to earlier discussions, right, regarding the draft of the CAP, where I think it was Vice Chair Kim who had initially suggested that as we are, moving forth action items to be, ideas to be implemented, we also linking to how the different county departments that will be a part of the implementation. And Andre, if I remember well, you had also asked that whenever possible, we also point out to existing policies that will be supporting that work. So thank you, Supervisor Provenza, for that comment. Commissioner Bennett? Britton? I'm mixing my wires here, sorry.
So, I don't actually have a lot of large-scale stuff left. I have a large number of small page-level things that I submitted in writing. So Julia, do you want me to make an appointment with you for that? Or how do we do that? I'm sure all of us have detailed thoughts on individual pages. We shouldn't bother with tonight. What's the plan there?
Yeah, so we are able, just with under the Brown Act, we're able to offer up to 6 one-on-ones for commission members. And so if it's really up to what makes the most sense for how you'd like your feedback to received. If you feel like you were able to get your thoughts across in the notes that you sent, wonderful. You're free to send more as well. If you'd rather verbally walk through your feedback, similarly to how we're doing right now, or just walk through all of the comments that you've made, that's also fine too. I just wanted to note that we're only able to do that up to 6 commission members, unfortunately. But we're collecting all of your feedback now. And so however, whichever format feels the most comfortable for you under that 6 commission member limit.
Since you will be in a better position to know which of these are bigger or smaller or more important, I'm going to let you judge whether I should be amongst that 6 or not. And that's fine with me. And so, yeah, trust you guys on that.
And
Thank you.
thank you. Can understand that you need to leave soon. Julia, would you let us know so far out of the 6 slots that are available, if some have been filled already, or if, you still have 6 like open meeting times?
Yeah, we still have 6 open meeting times. So again, yeah, for anyone who is just a preference for how you would like your comments to be received, we had with our green team, this is basing this actually off of our green team when they reviewed the strategies, measures, and actions. Some people preferred to just walk through all their feedback on a call, and some sent them in over email. So as we sort through and process comments, Ken, for example, we've glanced at your comments. They're super sufficient. If you feel like something was missing or you would like to talk through certain pieces, we also can follow up over email as well if we have questions. But for now, all the 6 slots are open for people.
Great. And so also I opened it that if you don't understand something I said, you should get in touch with me.
Yes, yeah.
I've been cryptic sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Julia. Commissioner Reed, did you want to say something?
I was just going to go back to our discussion of funding and implementation and remind us that we are in a period of flux and uncertainty with respect to the funding that's going to be available to us and what it's going to be directed too, and its availability. We just had a new state budget signed, and climate programs were part of the cuts. We also have a potential federal change in funding that may be effective. So I think we just need to be tolerant of in going with the flow and also being opportunistic with respect to things that funding might become available to implement something that really isn't as high on our priority list as some other item might be, but it still is to our benefit to go after those funds. And so being overly restrictive in terms of prioritization, and is, I think, not to our benefit. And also, there may be some things that are not as perhaps going to dish up as many emissions reductions as we might want, but they are what would be categorized as low-hanging fruit. This might be an easy way to reduce some emissions and also set examples or have a model of how something can be programmed and implemented in a way that will not only benefit the implementation of other measures, but also be a point of engagement for other people. It's sort of, the idea that agriculture operators could see their next door neighbor doing something in a really meaningful way that maybe gets a lot of attention. Maybe we take people and we tour their property, or maybe there's an article written about them. I mean, there are other ways to influence and engage in emissions reduction that I think we're going to need to exploit, given the circumstances under which we're trying to do this, and the need to really bring people on board. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Reid. And before I give the floor to Commissioner Dattel, Bernadette, very quickly back to the point you were making regarding outreach and accessibility. And you mentioned, language barrier. Both you and Andrew mentioned the importance of visual content in the form of short videos. I was thinking that, twice already, the Commission and Sustainability team have put out a call for proposals when it comes to bringing on board community-based organizations as partners. And I think that, I will leave it to the staff in terms of the legality, technicality of the way to proceed. But this seems like a good opportunity to be specific about the needs, right? So when inviting CBOs to join as partners, what is preventing us from ensuring that we are also reaching out and inviting proposals from local organizations that specialize in the creation of visual contents and videos and so on. Another thing is, we've been very fortunate with Decolores providing on-site Spanish interpretation when we had workshops, and that was very gracious of them. And I wonder if it's something that we can also be specific about when having those calls for proposal, and having one of the CBOs having a strong platform when it comes to content in a different language, and having the capacity to help also with that. So I'm just putting it out there for the staff. Commissioner Dattel, you wanted to share something, and after you speak, with the approval, I hope, of the Commission, I would like to make room for public comment, and we'll do our very best to end the meeting at 6 p.m. Commissioner Dattel.
Yes, I'll be brief. I just want to remind people that the document does have in it already the phasing, which speaks to the concern about when we need to do it. It has some cost benefit analysis, bang for the buck in there. It has at least some implications of where to go for financing at the current time. And it also has co-benefits listed. So there's lots of pieces that would go into thinking about implementation, even if it's not all pulled together in a nice, neat, linear way. And I would also point to the fact that how we're humming along with our early action items. And so we can see that our staff and the supervisors have taken a lot of those things to heart and really moved them forward. So I think we should have some level of confidence, despite the uncertainties in the document, helping us get toward implementation.
Thank you, Commissioner Dattel. Commissioner Kim?
Yes, to respond to Supervisor Provenza again, and also Commissioner Dattel, you are, and that's again very helpful that he noted that his Supervisor Provenza said what needs to be done, who's going to do it, when. We have the when and we have the what. Now it's just who. And, you know, I was just counting again, like how many actions. And I remember before it was like 200 plus actions. Actually, I counted again, it's like 170 actions. And from the 10 strategies and 30 plus measures, I guess the question is, has the green team just gone through all 170 actions and just said, this is possible within our, and so I think the green team should ask 3 questions. Like plus means we can do it within our county capabilities right now. Or it could be plus can't do it with our current county capabilities, but we have the current county funds. So if the supervisors directed the funds that way, we can actually still get it done. Or we can reasonably acquire new county general funds to be able to do it. So I think those are the 3 kind of ways that if the green team can identify, either we can currently do it within our capabilities, we currently have the funding to do it, but we haven't been directed. So like internally, we're not able to do it, or we don't have the funds yet, but this is feasibly county funds that could be acquired. And then everything else that is just not possible within the county in the current infrastructure and in the current reality. I think all 170 measures just like filtered in that way will give us a sense of like how realistic this is. And then let's just say out of the 170, we'll just be realistic and we'll just assume that only half the county can actually do. And so we'll just say, you know, 85 the county can do. Then from the 85, we can do a prioritization framing of what the county staff can do based upon the priorities of the supervisors. And then for the other 85 that cannot be done, I think that's going to be all external, you know, realities of all of the political climate of the, you know, both state and federal. And so that's a little bit out of our control, but at least we can reprioritize what can be done. And so hopefully to respond to Supervisor Provenza's point.
Thank you, Andrew. Julia, do you want to address Andrew's question on whether the green team has had a chance to go through all action items? Initially, there were 182 from what I remember.
Yeah, I would be happy to. So from February to April, the green team, they reviewed different department and division heads, also staff within their team. They reviewed all of the 185 actions and then gave their feedback on phasing of the actions as well and what's possible for what they think is possible for their staff and their division. And within that, it would be helpful to mention that funding is a part of that conversation. And what we have shared with the green team so far is that funding is iterative and we are, you know, constantly advocating and have received such great support from the board. And when we've had these conversations, early conversations, transitioning from that early 2024 to spring 2024, when we've been talking about just the phasing and I guess the possibility of all of these actions, we've come back in June to talk about figure out the who. And so that will be finalized by the end of this month, the division and department assignments. But again, finalized, what we've expressed to the green team from the sustainability division is, you know, finalized with a lot of asterisks about, we will be working with these division and department heads. We are not interested in just putting more on people's plates. We want to have this be a really collaborative process. And funding is one of the bigger question marks, but that's also where we receive feedback for which actions are possible and not possible from different members of the Green Team.
Julia, thank you for that.
So are you saying by the end of this month, there will be a report of all of the actions and which one is possible and which one's not possible currently by the county heads?
Yeah, from the Green Team. And I think I will double check with Dudek, but this is something that will appear in the cap. So it's taken a little bit longer than we had liked, but my hope would be that in August, we can come back to the commission with a staff report on that item, since it will not appear in the cap until a little bit later when we're working on getting it from draft to final.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Julia. Okay. So I would like to open the floor to public comment. Right before we do so, allow me all to please again give a shout out to our Green Team. And the reason I insist on doing that is because not taking for granted the fact that we have one, that it exists, and there are many localities, municipalities working on the CAP, process that don't have the same level of involvement that we have from staff across the board of, operations of the county. So that's very unique. And then next time you meet them, Julia, please, if it's okay with the commission, I would love for us to extend our appreciation for the work they're doing. Yes, there's like notes of approval here. So this is the end of our meeting. We are at time. If you need to leave now, we totally understand. I will use my privilege as chair to still invite for public comments. If we have any, a reminder to members of the public and to our commission, we will be listening to the comment. We won't be answering them. We won't be addressing them. As a reminder to members of the public, you're invited to state any affiliation that you would like us to be aware of. Traditionally, we have, allowed up to 3 minutes of public comments. You still have 3 minutes, and we welcome if your comment is also happens to be shorter than that, no pressure. But do we have any public comments at this time, Julia?
We do. We have Christine Shoemaker. So Christine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And again, as a reminder, of course, public comments are exclusively addressing the draft of the CAP. Christine, we are listening. Thank you very much for joining us today and for your interest and contribution to the writing of the CAP.
So thank you. So first of all, I want to echo what everybody has said, that getting this far is an amazing accomplishment. So I am very pleased with what we have. Most of the comments I have are rather specific. They have, I found a few errors and that sort of thing. So I'm not going to go into that. I just encourage everybody to, if there's an area where they have a lot of knowledge, make sure you go and look, because I found some errors, and I think we want to make sure that that's all correct. So my main suggestion and what I want to address has to do with Chapter 6, the specific strategies that are in Chapter 6, and I don't actually think the commission actually got to that. But what I would like to suggest, I want to highlight and emphasize the importance of clean energy in achieving the overall goal. So my recommendation is that you make a new strategy, call it clean energy, that is, leave the building and electrification efficiency as one strategy and split the clean energy into a second strategy. My reason for suggesting this is that clean energy or clean electricity is critical for transportation, for buildings, for agricultural goals, as well as others. So what exists now, it's sort of the two measures relating to that are tucked into the building section, and it's kind of confusing. And when we had the thing that Julia has with the boxes, it really is kind of confusing. And putting it out as its own one would emphasize that it's a priority. Clean energy is critical for all of these goals. And you talked here about people wanting to know actions they can take and things that they can do right away. And if you have it as its own strategy, I think that kind of emphasizes that the clean energy is something that they can take action on. One other thing that I want to say is that relating to Chapter 6, and I think it was Commissioner Bennett that said, put that first. I definitely agree with that. Because the other suggestion that I have in here, a smaller one, is that the chapters need to be like self-sufficient. You need to be able to read them on their own. And chapter 6 didn't even have the list of the strategies at the beginning of it. You would have had to go back to the intro or chapter 1 to know what the various strategies are. So I think it would be very good to have that first. This is what we can do. Anyway, thank you very much. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. We've taken note of your comment. Do we have another public comment? I think you said there were 2.
No, so far there was just one from Christine.
Okay, so Commissioner Austin would like to address us.
I just wanted to know, Julia, can you confirm for mostly members of the public, how long do folks have to provide additional comment before it goes to the county supervisor? Like, what's sort of the timeline for the public, just to reiterate so that folks can hear that?
Yeah, we have to close the public comment portal, unfortunately, on the 10th. So this Wednesday, we have until end of the day on Wednesday. This is to make sure that we're able to get to that fall adoption. We're wanting to accommodate for county staff and the commission, but unfortunately it still needs to be closed on the 10th for the public comment portal.
It's a good reminder. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. And what is the deadline for commissioners to have a one-on-one meeting with you?
For commission members, we have pushed it out about 2 weeks, so it will be July 26th.
Okay, thank you. So, fellow commissioners and members of the public, we are at the end of our time together. I would like to thank everyone for your availability today for this special meeting. Thank you to the members of the public and to Supervisor Provenza and his staff, Deputy Chief Allen, for joining us. And this is the end. There was something I wanted to mention. Yes, quick shout out and congratulations to Commissioner Austin. I heard excellent things regarding the CCEC forum, climate, collaborative, on climate and energy forum in Palm Springs. So it's being talked about in the sustainability newsletter, so make sure you read that bit. But again, thank you so much to your organization for the work that you're doing across the state and the country on those topics. So have a good rest of the month to everyone. Stay cool. And again, I cannot thank you all enough for all the work you've been doing since this commission was established. So thanks to everyone involved, to staff and our supervisors. Have a good month of July. And this adjourns our meeting. It is 6:07 p.m. Bye-bye.